All right, I think we'll get underway. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Eckstein Hall, Marquette University Law School. This is On the Issues. We welcome you back to a new semester of events. We're beginning today with a gentleman next to me, the police chief for the city of Milwaukee, Ed Flynn. He has been to the law school on a number of occasions, and he has agreed to join us again today. So please give him a warm welcome to Marquette Law School. We have a lot to talk about today, but top of mind for everybody in this room, for those of us who live in Milwaukee or the Milwaukee area, is what's happening in terms of homicides and in terms of violence in this city. And Chief, let's begin there. I mean, you and I have talked about this in the past. We've got about 103 homicides in the city so far this year. Last year we had 86 was the total. People are wondering what's happening and why. What can you tell us?
Well, that's always one of the great challenges in my business. There's two reasons to find out why. One is, what can we do about this particular problem right now, right here? Can we disaggregate its elements? Can we figure out if this is amenable to a conventional police response of additional personnel doing more things at a specific series of locations? Or are there other issues going on that the police can coordinate a response on? So, for example, there may be a neighborhood with a troubled house that's full of individuals who are preying on the neighborhood and disrupting it and are living in a house that's rented by a slumlord that's below code. Sometimes if you solve the problem of the troubled bar or the troubled house, the problems of the neighborhood go away. Is it that kind of problem? Or is there something else going on? Something that's bigger than conventional police tactical solutions or conventional problem-oriented policing solutions involving the engagement of other civic entities. We're really looking hard at this homicide issue because we perceive more than one thing is going on at a time. Now, and I brought a book full of data with me. So sometimes I'll have to check myself because I know when I say a number, alas, I don't get credited with a margin of error. If my number's not right, I'm explaining myself or whatever. So, when we get to some specifics, I can look them up very quickly. But very broadly, I'll start with where I was 3 weeks ago, I guess maybe today. I was in Washington, D.C. Major City Chiefs Organization convened a meeting of the largest cities in America because we'd just done a survey of our members and found out that 2/3 of our membership were experiencing increases in homicides and non-fatal shootings, all in the same year. It's kind of unusual. We dug a little deeper, and we found that of those cities that met a certain profile, like Milwaukee's, significant amount of intergenerational poverty located in very specific areas of the city, with recently weakened gun laws, we're seeing a dramatic increase in homicides. And so, for example, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, Chicago, St. Louis, Houston, Dallas, Milwaukee, we're having significant increases in homicides. Now, Milwaukee, some of our enormous percentage is based on the fact that last year was the 4th lowest total of homicides in the last 25 years. But notwithstanding that fact, 100 homicides already is a daunting number. So what do we see are some of the commonalities among the cities? What things did we share with ourselves that were similar? Well, we found out the victim demographic is identical in all of our cities. Overwhelmingly young African-American men with criminal records being murdered by other young African-American men with criminal records, armed with high-capacity, high-quality firearms that were legally purchased. Okay? That's our demographic. Question is, and this is really requires us to take a step back, and I don't know all the answers, despite the way I behave sometimes, is I'm convinced there is some sort of tipping point phenomenon at work. Are you mostly familiar with Malcolm Gladwell, tipping point? Several changes in different places can sometimes over time result in a sudden and dramatic increase in whatever the phenomenon you're observing. I believe one of his examples was the buying of hush puppy shoes, but there were several other examples of dramatic changes suddenly, surprisingly. How do we disaggregate the sudden changes that are driving homicides in places like Baltimore and St. Louis and Milwaukee? Why suddenly 80 and 60% increases in one single year. And that's going to require more work than I can produce. I've got theories, and some of them we can probably talk about later. I mean, is the birth cohort bigger? Do I just have more people in that age group from a disadvantaged background? If that's true, then the 10% who are going to get in trouble, it's going to be a bigger number. Is that it? Is it that our court systems, because of the increased use of them, are overwhelmed and therefore not producing sanctions nor deterrence? Is that having an impact on the decisions of the immature brains of young men with guns? Can't prove it. Changes in gun laws. Missouri, for example, St. Louis has had over 100% increase in homicides, or at least it had a couple of weeks ago, recently passed a law that made the constitutional carry law. All right, everybody's got an automatic right to get a gun in Missouri now. It's an ideological law like ours. It's not a practical law. But is that a variable? Is it a variable here? I can tell you that every year since the new law passed, I've had an increase in the percentage of homicides committed with new pistols. Correlation, causation, don't know. But there are a number of variables out there I think need to be explored beyond what we're doing. Because I wouldn't say funny, what's interesting to me is we're out there. The boys and girls of this police department are out there working their tails off. And here's what's interesting. I look at this today, as of today, comparing August of 2015 to August of 2014, every single crime number is lower, including homicide, this August compared to last August. Every single one of them is, with the exception of sexual assault, small base number, and everybody is related or knows each other in those circumstances. So I'm not being dismissive, I hope you understand, but I mean, that's all the other ones you'd expect the police to have an impact on the streets are down this month compared to a year ago. That's important. Summertime, hard work, lots going on the streets. They're out there working. But nonetheless, as of today, our homicides are running 82% ahead of last year. So it's a dramatic and sudden change.
Chief, you've told me, though, that you think that many of these homicides you can't trace to a gang war, you can't trace it to a specific, but you said they seem to be what fall into the category of dispute, argument. That's what you're seeing, isn't it?
Yes. There is a slice of the criminally inclined community for which violence to maintain status with one's peers is absolutely normative. All right? I mean, we're dealing with a social norm within a subgroup of the population. And the use of deadly violence to redress a grievance, protect the honor of a girlfriend, resolve a Facebook fight, resolve a neighborhood fight. I mean, we have these enormous fights in the street between two groups of people who live in the same neighborhood. Somebody makes a phone call, the cavalry comes with guns, suddenly we've got shootings. We've had, the exact number now, I think we've had 10 multiple death shootings so far in single incidents. I think last year at this time we had half that number, less than half that number, okay? So we're getting a lot of violence attached to some form of argument or fight among people with criminal records. The total right now, I think argument fight is the biggest single driver of homicides. It's about 23%, but then there's another 9% that are retaliation, which is getting even for the fight. One of the most dangerous things you can do in some neighborhoods is win a fist fight. That's a dangerous thing to do. If you win that fist fight, somebody's going to shoot you. And we're seeing a lot of that as well. But it's not your classic utilitarian violence to advance a competition for a drug trade. It happens, but it's not driving the homicides. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. I mean, interestingly, our robbery-related homicides are down 45%, which is good news. But our homicides related directly to arguments and fights are up. I've forgotten how much, but it's 100% at least.
Let me pursue that. You mentioned that it's not apparently rival gangs battling for the drug trade, but let me just say something as somebody who lived through the 1980s and 1990s in this city and saw the crack epidemic send homicide rates through the roof here. We have around the country, not just in Wisconsin and not just in Milwaukee, where we've seen many heroin-related deaths in the last year. We see a surge in heroin use and in opioid use. Does that have anything to do with what other cities, not just Milwaukee, but what all of these cities are seeing? Could there possibly be a link there? Or have you dismissed that as a possible cause?
We're not going to dismiss it. Central time zone is seeing an increase in heroin. Eastern time zone, it's something they call synthetic marijuana. You've probably heard of it. It's sold as a potpourri, and people smoke it, and it's full of all kinds of additives. It's not currently illegal in a lot of places, and it's very easy to alter the chemical compounds. It's addictive, it's powerful, and it produces, interestingly enough, depending on the user, completely opposite effects. Either it numbs them out like heroin does, or it jacks them up like meth does. And that's been a significant aspect of the homicides in D.C. Big piece of the homicides in Baltimore has been fights over the stolen OxyContin from the drugstore attacks during the riots. They were a major target of the rioters. They looted the drugs from these, the organized gangs of Baltimore targeted the Walgreens and the Rite Aids and looted them of their OxyContin. It flooded the market, prices dropped, and they had a significant homicidal back and forth over control of that markets. That's not what we've seen here. Doesn't mean we couldn't have it, but it's not driving our homicides currently.
Let me have you respond to what you hear from other folks in this community. That is that we simply need more police officers on the streets. If we'd hire another 200 or 250 police officers, things would be different. What do you say about that?
Well, there's an aphorism I try to live by, particularly when we're sitting around the conference room trying to come up with a solution to a current issue, and that is, and you've heard this before, but you're still allowed to laugh. There's no complicated problem for which there isn't a simple answer. That's wrong. Okay? And the art of politics is identifying these simple wrong answers and endlessly repeating them until somebody votes for them. Okay?
Why is it wrong?
The wrong answer, I'll start with a story, always helpful. July 3rd, you may remember, that's the big fireworks in this town. Hundreds of thousands of people in the city. And every year, we have an awful lot of officers at the top of the hill by the beginning of North Avenue because we have thousands of people at the same time streaming out of the park home. And there are traffic problems and crowd control problems, and yes, we have to be alert for neighborhood issues that will be resolved, on North Avenue on the way home. So I was standing at the top of the hill with about 60 officers, all right, spread out, prepared to safely move the crowd, direct traffic, and so on. I'm standing there, and a man comes up to me and my command staff there and starts berating us about having too many police officers there. And it looks like a police state, and there's even a helicopter overhead, and he found this highly offensive. And just as the last word of him being offended by the police presence came out of his mouth, I heard, bang, 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 bang. And we turn around, and 150 feet from where I was standing, a 15-year-old had just murdered a 15-year-old with a .40 caliber pistol. Okay? I had 60 cops there. He knew it. They knew it. This is some kind of intergroup feud that had started over a series of Facebook postings insulting somebody's girlfriend. And the two groups got to jawing across the street. One of them produces a firearm and lights up the other group, kills a 15-year-old kid. All right? Now, how many more cops would I have needed there to prevent that? Is there a number? And part of the challenge I have to face, even as I want resources to deal with issues of crime, fear, and disorder, and neighborhood stabilization, is this. Where's everybody else in the funding stream, and what are they doing with their money? Because the police departments of America cannot be the single sociological answer for all of the sociological problems facing America. But right now, outside of this room, that appears to be the political consensus. Mental health has been delegated to the criminal justice system, you may have noticed. Biggest mental health facility in Wisconsin is where? Yeah, okay, as it was in Massachusetts, where I worked previously to here, okay? And every time there's a crisis on the streets dealing with somebody undergoing a mental health crisis or a substance abuse crisis or a family crisis or any other kind of social crisis, the answer is what? More training for the police. Yeah, call the police, and then it's more calling, more training. We need more training for the police, okay? I mean, it's as though society has decided there's no social problem so complicated it can't be fixed with more training for the police, okay? That is a social abdication of responsibility. But that's where we are right now. Now, I'm not trying to say we haven't got our part to play, and we've got to do our part professionally, and we have to do it with the best training available and do it with restraint. But what I am saying is, I can't arrest my way out of the mental health crisis. I can't arrest my way out of the child abuse crisis. I mean, we once doubled back and looked at our shooters, because I posit a theory. I bet a high percentage of our shooters have been sexually or physically abused as children, because there is some research on that. We did a random sample. We found like 40% of a random sample of like 50 shooters had been reported to the criminal justice system. Now, I have no idea how many reported to the social service system, because, of course, God forbid they would ever tell me any information for research purposes, so I don't know. But I would guess that's a big number of hyper-violent young people who started out being repetitive victims of violence and now grow into young adulthood scary, okay? Where is our upstream capacity to deal with that? Pretty limited. So there are a lot of social variables out there amenable to interventions beyond the police that are pretty much underfunded. And so if we're in a fight for resources, and you're going to ask me what I'd like 50 more prosecutors. Because the courts are teeming with serious offenders, and believe me, a lot of folks don't understand. If you're a career offender, you have to work really hard to go to prison. Okay, I've got right here the names of people. I've got 10 people in the last year and a half who've been arrested more than twice for carrying a gun illegally. Okay, the same calendar year. What happens to them? There's no capacity. All right, there's no capacity in the system to handle the amount of social dysfunction being resolved by the criminal justice system. And so if you are somebody living in a poor neighborhood victimized by crime, and you've got one of these guys in your neighborhood that's been arrested twice for illegally carrying a gun and shot once, for example, which is an average profile. You know, I mean, we're good at predicting who's going to get shot. I just wish we could predict when they were going to get shot. All right? It is logical for you to not want to cooperate with the police because you know you're going to see the bad guy within a week on your street giving you a bad look, trying to intimidate you. So, you know, there's a lot of places in the system that could use more money. And there's a lot of places in the social safety network that could use a lot of money. I wish it wasn't a zero-sum game, but I'd be happy to see all this talk about spending $20 million more in the police department, see some of that money get spent on the social safety network, and then maybe we wouldn't need so many cops.
You've been critical of Wisconsin's gun laws, and some of your remarks have been fairly controversial. You've called them absurdly weak. The weakest of any state where you've worked as a police professional. So what do you want to see done with gun laws in this state? And do you think there's any chance that what you want done will be done?
Two very distinct questions. All right, I'm going to work very hard right now. I'm going to be temperate. I'm really, really going to work hard on being temperate, because when I'm intemperate, I find I'm highly quotable, but also those are the weeks I have to make sure I listen to satellite radio. And also I know my in-basket's going to fill up with people who type only in capital letters and only use exclamation points. So, our problem here in Wisconsin is that in a rush to secure the approval of the NRA, the current legislature passed a very foolish bill in the hopes of allowing people to have a concealed carry permit, which is a perfectly understandable desire. In every state I had worked in before here had a concealed carry law. Okay? So allow me, please, to tell the truth. I have no personal objection to lawful concealed carry laws. I don't. There are neighborhoods I get why people would want to carry one, and I would say if they qualify under any kind of reasonable standard, why shouldn't they, given the fact that we do have some violent places in our country? So, that out of the way. Sadly, if you start talking about any kind of rational governance of access to firearms, you've touched the third rail, which means, you are anti-American and, trying to destroy people's constitutional rights. Start from the following premise. I don't think for a minute when the founders came up with the Second Amendment, they had the intention of arming pirates, brigands, or highwaymen. I don't think that was their intention. I don't think they thought, I wonder what Blackbeard the pirate should have more guns than he has. So let's pass a Second Amendment. No, I don't think they thought that. Don't think that's what it was about. It wasn't about arming criminals. Problem here in Wisconsin, when we passed the law, we made one fundamental mistake to start with. No matter how many times you are arrested carrying a gun illegally in Wisconsin, it's a misdemeanor. No matter how many times you are arrested. 10 times? 20 times? Now, I ask you, if you're a young criminal and the choice is not carry a gun and maybe get shot by my criminal rivals who I'm in an argument with, or carry a gun and get charged with a misdemeanor, what are you rationally going to decide to do? You're going to carry the gun. It's more dangerous to get caught without it. Now, if you're carrying it, what's the likelihood you're going to use it the next time you're in an argument with some guy you don't like? Pretty high. It's right there, isn't it? Okay? So that was the law before they passed concealed carry. So my suggestion was, now that you're going to have a concealed carry law that's legal, can we not make it a felony to violate that law? Because now you have a law. No, I can't do that. Okay, so I made a second request. The new law says that only convicted felons don't qualify for concealed carry permit. Now, what did I just say about our criminal justice system? Like every other big city, it's overwhelmed with people who have done really bad things. And all these lawyers here, what do we call it when you come in with a really bad charge, but you're willing to avoid a trial by pleading to something else? What's that called? Yeah, plea bargaining, right? I mean, we can say all the mean things we want to in the world about it, but the system will collapse because if we make 12 to 15,000 felony arrests a year here in Milwaukee City, do you think we can have 15,000 trials? Yeah, I don't think so either. So yes, plea bargaining, reality. Lots of bad guys go to jail for 30 days instead of the 5 years they might have because they pled to the lower charge. Great. We define a career criminal in Wisconsin as 3 misdemeanor convictions or 1 felony conviction in 5 years. That's a definition of a career criminal in Wisconsin. So they're only saying the convicted felons don't get a permit. So I called up the chief of staff for one of our elected representatives, and I said, listen, could you amend that and just say, if you fit the career criminal statute, you can't have a concealed carry permit? His answer was, that's not the NRA's position. And he said, here's the phone number of the NRA lobbyist in Washington. If it's okay with him, it's okay with us. So I called him up and I asked for permission for Wisconsin to govern itself. And he denied it. And so in Wisconsin, I have armed career criminals lawfully carrying guns, escorting drug dealers around my city. That's our law. I don't know how that helps me reduce violent death in this city, but it certainly doesn't help it. Now, there's other problems with the law as well, but if I was going to pick 2 that are totally creating, because, I know it's correlation, not causation, and I'm in a university, so I should be careful the difference. But every year since the law has been in effect, I'm having a higher percentage of my homicides committed with firearms. And every year since the law has been in effect, the time to crime between the buying of a gun and its use in a crime has gotten smaller. All right? Correlation. Wild coincidence. But it's worthy of exploration.
The criminal of today, one of the arguments you hear in Milwaukee is that the criminal of today is more brazen because of policy changes in the department. Police pursuit policy changes. That police, the argument goes, are more hesitant, more reluctant to pursue someone who is suspected of engaging in criminal behavior or someone you might want to pull over because they're doing something suspicious, that you're just less likely to do that, and the criminals know it, and they take advantage of it. What do you say about that?
I say, well, Bob, you're wrong.
Talking about Alderman Donovan, right? Yeah.
A little bit of perspective on this one. In 2011, we had, within 1 month, 3 completely innocent residents of this city get killed by people fleeing from the police. In all 3 of those incidences, the camera in the car clearly showed the officers complied with our policy and had stopped the pursuit because of the dangerous behavior of the person they were pursuing. So we already had that requirement, but still 3 people died. As a matter of fact, it was earlier this week, there was an article in the Chicago Sun-Times. Grandpa, fixing his car, just got killed by some teenagers in a stolen car fleeing from the police. Okay? Death is a big thing to discount in the context of what our policy should be to apprehend criminals. That's the big one. All right? If I'm going to risk the death of the community, it's got to be for big stakes, right? So when this happened so quickly to us, I said, all right, we got to look at this. We know we've got a state-of-the-art pursuit policy, which the cops are adhering to. But I can't control the behavior of the speeding idiot I'm after, even if we've stopped the pursuit. I said, I think we've got to put limits on when you're allowed to initiate the pursuit. And so the guidelines, we said, you've got to have probable cause to believe that person has committed a violent crime. I'm simplifying. There's other aspects of it, but that's the heart of it. That person, you have to know or have probable cause to believe has committed a crime. So, for example, if that car was taken in a carjacking and you know it, you can chase it. Carjacking is a violent crime. Somebody got pulled out of their car and had a gun put to their head and chase that guy. All right, if there's been a bank robbery and there goes the bank robber's car, all right, that person represents a threat to the community already. You can chase that car. Okay, the car's been stolen. And in Milwaukee, I think 45% of our stolen cars are stolen with the keys, especially in the wintertime. Will you stop it? Stop warming up your cars. Anyway, okay, stolen car. Do you think I should risk anybody's life to catch a stolen car thief? Now, here's how we figured it. We looked at it. We looked back in the past several years to see if anybody we'd ever caught in a stolen car had ever actually been charged with the felony of stealing the car. Guess what? Nobody. Because I can't prove they stole the car, can I? They're just in the stolen car, driving it, trying to get away from me. Can't prove they stole it. So they all get charged with operating a vehicle without the owner's consent. What happens to them? Probation. If they're a juvenile, they get sent immediately home. Because under the point system in juvenile court, as to whether or not you're going to be held for any period of time, a stolen car counts as 0 points. Now, is anybody's life worth 0 points operating without owner's consent? I decided no. So we don't chase stolen cars, and hadn't. Now, the policy changed in January of 11. By 2014, January of 2014, stolen cars were still down 50%. And it was in 2014 that the world lit up with stolen cars in this town. Okay? I don't think you can say it's just because we stopped chasing stolen cars. And we had kids killed anyway that we weren't chasing. We had a terrible incident down in Washington Heights about a year ago, or earlier this March. 3 kids dead because they saw a police car, and either they were trying to taunt them to get them to chase them or what, but they smashed into the pillars there and all got killed anyway. So I don't say, I don't say that that's causing it. There's no causation there. We still chase people for violent crimes, and we have to accept that the protection of human life is our fundamental responsibility, and we have to, weigh the balance. And if the balance is society clearly doesn't think stealing a car is a big deal, your life isn't risk apprehending that person.
So recently, a new initiative was announced to try and deal with some of what we've seen in the community in the last year, and it means you're going to get a couple of assistant attorneys general to help with gun prosecutions. You're going to have, 12 detectives, is it, who are going to work strictly on prosecuting gun crimes, investigating gun crimes, I should say. You've got the Department of Corrections is going to do more, well, let me say, more consistent monitoring of people on probation for gun crimes. Is that going to make a difference? What can you tell people in this room? Should they be optimistic that this is merely a short-lived trend, or is this something?
Well, I'm just thrilled we've been able to get anybody else's attention. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes lobbying here. I've been pushing the AG for quite some time to us. He kept saying, what does the police department need? And I said, we're up to 1,600 guns seized this year already. I mean, we generate Chicago-style numbers. If you prorate our 600,000 against their 2.7 million, we take as many or more guns off the streets than they do, okay? Getting the guns and making the arrest isn't my problem. My problem is getting them charged and getting them prosecuted. And so I said to the AG, dedicate some people to it. Get them in here and let them go to war. We'll present the cases. And I'll make sure that I've got detectives, reviewing all of our gun arrests to make sure that the baby cop that made the arrest filled out the report in a way that establishes the elements of the crime and meets whatever standards you need for prosecution. But we got to go after these guys. And even though most of them are still going to be misdemeanors, one of the things I've asked once again is to change the law on sentencing. I know, sentences are not fashionable right now for a wide variety of reasons. But I don't know how to get into the decision matrix of immature brains that are carrying guns and shooting each other if they don't perceive there is a reliable sanction awaiting them for that. Happy to see other, sentencing laws change. Don't care. But when it comes to illegal firearms possession and use, if they don't go away, they're not going to learn anything. Some people need a prison ministry, as one of the clergymen told me, and I think these young fellas do.
Earlier, you mentioned, crime numbers and violent crime numbers that are going up in other communities, and that's certainly the case in many places, but not all places. And I want to talk to you about what's being done in other cities and whether this is something that Milwaukee looks at. Kansas City has something called the No Violence Alliance. Homicide rates are down last year, down again this year. This is very similar, I think, to what was called the High Point, North Carolina community policing idea, where you target the really bad guys and get them off the street. But then there's this other group of folks, some of whom are probably involved in illegal activity, maybe nonviolent illegal activity. But you call them in, maybe in a community setting, and you offer them a choice. Here's one path. We're going to arrest you. We're going to prosecute you. Here's the other path. Social services. You have a drug problem, we've got somebody over here who can help you with your drug problem. You need a job, we've got somebody who can help you with job training. You offer them a choice. And they seem to feel that's working. We did a little bit of that in this city back a few years ago. Is that something to take another look at?
Well, we've done it a few times, and we're even doing it now. It's here's our challenge, and maybe we'll see some changes. The key element in the Group Violence Reduction Initiative, or the High Point Initiative, is the involvement of the United States Attorney's Office. Because there are serious federal sanctions for a number of crimes that here are misdemeanors. Now, you don't want to use it wantonly. It's got to be the right bad guys. But the group call-ins we've done, and we did one just a couple of months ago, you are bringing in your career criminals. And you're saying, here's a chance to change your ways. Here's the services, here's the clergy members, here's the jobs people. This is your chance. But if we nab you for a violent crime, you're going to get heavily sanctioned through criminal prosecution. We haven't been able to deliver the sanction. This is my third try at it. All right, and one of our big problems that it might change, I'm getting some indications of change from the federal bench. Our federal bench has acted as though they're too good to do these kinds of crimes, and they haven't taken them. Well, that's the linchpin. All right, the famous, Boston Miracle started with the head of their biggest gang, who'd been convicted a couple of times of shooting people in state court, of going away on federal charges for possession of a bullet. What a lot of people don't realize is that's the only prosecution they did, and crime among those gang groups still dropped like a rock because it was such a stunning change to what they've been used to with the sanctions available in state court. And so we've recently gotten some inquiries. They are sounding more interested. And I am hoping if we can get, you have to pick the right bad guys, okay? We get that. But if I can get that back again, then I think we're going to see some dramatic successes. But that has absolutely been the shortcoming in our last couple of efforts to use that specific tactic. Now, don't get me wrong. We do a heck of a lot of community-based policing out there. I mean, we have got more connections with more groups than at any time in this department's history. You know, we've got people coming around from the country looking at our White House-funded Building Neighborhood Capacity Grant. We've got people around the country coming to look at what we're doing, the Burn Criminal Justice Initiative grant. And both of those grants, and we're the only city to get both in the country, and we're the only city whose police department wrote the White House grant, both of them are organized around trying to use police as leverage to organize communities and empower them, all right? There's no informal social control in a disorganized community that's afraid. But if you can give a community courage and identify people willing to work together on common problems and begin to deliver some successes to them, you can begin to develop neighborhoods strong enough to be more resistant to crime and disorder. And that is our ultimate goal, okay? Yes, we want to reduce crime statistically and make significant progress, but long-term progress depends on strong and stable neighborhoods, and that requires other services that the police can leverage as kind of the connection between the community and its needs in the rest of the system.
Very briefly, one other approach, which is sort of interesting, is being done in Racine, which you're probably familiar with. This is where they've literally built houses in certain higher crime neighborhoods and staffed them with police officers in a way to build sort of a community relationship. It has police officers there pretty much all the time. I was stunned when I sat in another event in this law school, and the mayor of Racine said they had not had a homicide in his city for more than a year. And Racine has some of the same problems on a smaller scale that the city of Milwaukee has. Is that an idea worth exploring? This notion, we have a lot of foreclosed houses in this city. Mm-hmm. Could you put police officers in these neighborhoods on a more permanent basis in order to address some of the issues in that particular neighborhood?
You know, everybody has to develop responses based on their understanding of the problem in their community. I think we've got a pretty good handle on what the dynamics are. And my issue is I've got to get the cops out into the public spaces. Okay, and the public spaces are where people have to feel confident, because if communities use their public spaces, that by itself is a form of informal social control. And so getting the cops out of the cars and on foot and on bicycles, which we've done, you know, double the number of bicycle coppers. Everybody pulls a footbeat sometimes, and everybody is, you know, working hard, connecting to the neighborhoods. That's where I want to make my investment. I don't gainsay what they're doing, but basically they're doing is building a series of places where the cops stay there and the people come to them. I want the cops out in the neighborhood, you know, dealing with the neighborhood. And alas, I mean, we've got the calls for service and the crime rate to justify the fact they've got to get out in those public spaces.
Which leads me, I think, to the next point, an important point in the city, the relationship between the community and the police department, and especially in light of the Dontre Hamilton death. You fired the officer who shot and killed Dontre Hamilton, who, for people in this room, and most people know the story, but a homeless man who battles some mental health issues. He's killed by your police officer. You fired him, not for excessive force, but because he did not follow police department policy in his dealings with Mr. Hamilton. What impact has that had on your relationship with the community, and more specifically the African-American community?
Well, I can say that making the decision to fire that officer in a way really brought the police and the community together, because the union voted no confidence in me and the community demanded my firing. And so my heart was kind of warmed for a while by that. But I think there are a few issues at work here, and let me try to disaggregate some of them. One is we in the police have to do a better job at the front end in terms of discipline about the decision-making that places an officer in a position where they have no option to use but to use deadly force. We've not done a good job at that. We've generally turfed it off to the DA, and the DAs generally make a narrow ruling about the legal use of the deadly force itself. And the vast majority of the time, the actual use of the deadly force can be justified under current law. So, for example, in the Dontre Hamilton case, It was well established through a multitude of witnesses that at the time the officer used deadly force, he had lost the fight, he had lost his baton, this individual was advancing on him with the baton, he pulled out his gun and fired a whole bunch of shots, ultimately killing the young man, okay? Within the narrow grounds of, does a cop who's lost the fight, lost his baton, is retreating, and is about to get hit with his baton, does he have a right to use deadly force? There's not a DA who's going to say no. My challenge as the administrator, however, was to say, we've got policies on handling the mentally ill, we've got policies on handling the homeless, we've got policies and people have been taught how to disengage, talk down, not precipitate a crisis. And this officer blundered into a situation in which he pretty much confronted this guy like he was a criminal suspect, even though he had, according to his own report, accurately diagnosed that he was in a mental health crisis. Well, if you are going to use anti-crime tactics on a guy in a mental health crisis, especially a schizophrenic, you're running a risk you're going to be in a combat situation really quick. Okay? So my determination was, once we could prove he'd had the appropriate training and by his own admission had accurately assessed the situation and done exactly the wrong thing, I said, okay, you didn't get out of bed that morning deciding to kill an innocent man. You made a wrong decision. That wrong decision ultimately had tragic consequences. I'm holding you accountable because of that. And I'm going to fire you because even though your motivation wasn't to do wrong, the end state is the worst it can be. All right, somebody's dead because you made the wrong decision. I think we have to do more of that. I'm going to be on the phone later today with the chief in crisis in another part of the country with a similar situation. And I'm going to say, you've got to take some ownership on this and just not just wait for somebody else to decide something. Because I honestly believe, we ask men and women under enormous pressure with insufficient information, under stress, in a crisis to make a decision right now. And if they're wrong, somebody may get hurt or get killed. And if we don't draw distinctions between error, unmotivated by malice that deserves accountability, versus a crime, who's going to do this job? Think of our soldiers in Afghanistan. How many of them have made deadly force errors, and how many of them have found themselves in The Hague facing war crime trials? There is an understanding your career may be over. You may get court-martialed because you made an error, but we understand that as long as they were acting under the lights of their flawed judgment for a proper purpose, we treat them differently. And I don't think we're going to get the broader community's support unless they believe that we in the system hold our people accountable and not have to rely or turf it off to the criminal justice system. There are cases that end up in the criminal justice system and should, and it's happened here. But there are other cases in which it's about judgment. And when judgment is wrong, but not evil, there's still got to be a consequence. And that's what we did. And yes, it generated a lot of controversy. But I will add the following. And I think it's important when Milwaukee gets some credit for itself once in a while. We had some people really angry about that who took to the streets. Nothing here was remotely like what happened anywhere else, was there? Did you hardly even see a cop in the camera frame? That was on purpose. Everybody we had at a site, even though not a single one of these marches had a permit, even though we offered to get them permits, they would refuse to get permits. They wanted to get arrested. They wanted drama. We refused to give them drama. And we would close off traffic and infuriate people so they could walk all over the streets of Milwaukee. A lot of people got inconvenienced. Nobody got arrested until they tried to take over the highway at rush hour. And I think the broader community, seeing the actual restraint of this department, despite the very real desire of many of these demonstrators to be martyrs for the cause and go to jail and fall down and scream police brutality, I think our biggest demonstration had maybe 70 people. And I think that's a tribute to the restraint of the tactics and also to the fact, to your original question, there's a hell of a lot of work being done at the grassroots between the real community people and the real cops protecting those neighborhoods. I think that's bought us some credit that played out in a time of crisis.
Very briefly, would greater use of body cameras help help the public have more confidence in the policing that's being done?
I'll tell you, it may. The cops are dying. They want them. Cops want body cameras right now. Despite what you may think, their attitude is, okay, if America has decided to give up its privacy in moments of its greatest family crisis, so I can walk into your house while you've got crazy hair and your son is drunk on the couch and is thrown up on himself and somebody broke the furniture. If you are happy with that, and if you're a public office holder, happy that the paper will no doubt ask for a public records request so they can get the film of that moment of crisis in your life, if that's okay with you, it's sure okay with us, because it's from the average officer's point of view, it's going to overwhelmingly put in context what they're dealing with, what they tried to do, and what actually happened. So, I remember being frightened by the book 1984 when I was young. How scary. Everybody will be recording and watching you all the time. We decided to do it to ourselves. So, I'm recorded when I'm at CVS, I'm recorded when I'm in the toll booth, I'm recorded when I walk down the street. Now you'll be recorded whenever you talk to police officers. So, yeah, we're looking forward to getting them. We'll be implementing them soon. The contract's been let. The training is starting, and in the next few weeks, next 6 or 8 weeks, you're going to start seeing them on the street.
I'm going to leave about 10 minutes for questions. We'll have time for 2 or 3. Here's my final question. It's a very, very direct question, and it's, is Milwaukee safe? Because if you live out of this community, if you live outstate, I think the perception on the part of some people is that this city is simply not safe. Is it safe?
And here's the direct answer to that. No, I mean this sincerely. When you think about it, nobody lives in Milwaukee. You live in your neighborhood, right? We got some of the safest neighborhoods in the state, and some of the most dangerous. If you're an African American in Milwaukee, you are, I can tell you, there's 100 and some times, you're 18 times more likely to get shot if you're an African American in Milwaukee than you are if you're a white person. Okay? It's dangerous to be a young black man living in a neighborhood characterized by intergenerational poverty. It's way dangerous. The violent death rate is something on the order of like 287 per 100,000 for African Americans. That's huge. Okay, so we have our version of Chicago's Englewood. And it's dangerous there, and it's very dangerous for those young men who live there, and even more dangerous for those who are part of the subculture of crime. And there are vast areas of Milwaukee in which nothing happens. The irony is, and this isn't your doing, Mike, but because of the gradual devolution of the news business, all right, news in metropolitan Milwaukee is who got shot, it's cold, Packers. That's it. All right, the day I get a cold Packer shot, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. But that's the sad thing. I mean, I can describe for you the 87% of my victims of shootings and homicides are people in the crime life themselves. But to the average person out, some drug dealer shoots a drug dealer, they decide not to go to the symphony. I mean, that is a problem for us, but I don't think it's as bad as we thought, because there's something on the order of $3 billion worth of development going on downtown as we speak. You see the T cranes. People are investing in our city. Mercifully, most people with big picture viewpoints, and before you get too worried, 18% of the city's taxes come from 3% of the city's property. So don't gainsay downtown development. It floats everybody in the city's boat, okay? 18% of our money comes from 3% of the property, and it's growing dramatically. So I think, people are getting a better general sense of what the real Milwaukee is. But yeah, we got a moral obligation to deal with the extraordinary levels of violence that are plaguing those kinds of neighborhoods in every big city in America.
Let me take 2 or 3 questions. Raise your hand if you're interested in asking a question. Please, no speeches, just a question. And if you're in the seating bowl, put your finger down on the rim, not on the ball. Keep your finger down on the rim, and we'll go from there. See a hand in the back? Wait for a second. We'll get you a microphone.
How you doing, Chief Flynn? So a few things, and I promise I won't make a speech, Mike.
Okay.
you guys base a lot of your high kind of traffic stops. You do a lot of, pretextual, data-driven stops, and that's, at your own admission. Why hasn't that, in your opinion, made a dent in the homicide rate? And then also, coming back to another thing you said, when it comes to characterizing, actually a few things, so the protesters and kind of like, development and things, and, I think everybody in this room is, for the most part, a fan of Milwaukee. I am myself. But don't you think it's dangerous to separate those different kind of groups and demographics and kind of characterizing protesters who disagree with some of the actions of the city attorney and, the police department maybe even, as, just people who are troublemakers? I think that's a very dangerous thing. But first, like I said, I would like you to answer the question about the pretextual stops and doing half the population in stops and not making a dent in the homicides.
All right, thanks for the question. Chief?
Well, the short answer is it made a dramatic dent in crime in this city for the better part of 7 years in a row. Okay? The purpose of doing the traffic stops, and I hasten to add so everybody understands, one of the things we did was we have found, and this is borne up again in city after city, the majority of your traffic-related injuries and deaths are almost exactly correlated with where the majority of your violent crime is. So if you do a lot of traffic enforcement, you can make a dent in both. What I was concerned about, however, was if we did the traffic enforcement piece of writing the ticket, we were going to be imposing a poor people's tax on people who had the disadvantage of living in high-crime neighborhoods with lots of crashes. Kind of like, okay, great, so if I reduce crime, make everybody mad at me, what good's that done? So what we did was we told officers, when you observe any traffic violation, we want a car stop. Make the stop. The preferred outcome is a warning. There was an article in the paper a couple weeks ago about the dramatic decrease in citations in municipal court. That's not an accident. All right? We made the value judgment that stopping people and telling them to drive more safely or get their taillight fixed might do just as much good as writing them a ticket, with the added advantage of they don't have to pay a ticket or get jammed up and lose their license because they forgot to pay the ticket or what have you. Over that period of time, when traffic stops were going up by over 100%, citizen complaints declined by 40%. A working theory is nobody likes to get stopped by the cops, but everybody likes a break. Challenge with relating that to homicides is homicide's a different phenomenon if what's driving the homicides is argument and beefs between people with criminal records who are looking actively to shoot each other. All right? Me being active and visible in public spaces should have an impact on robbery and an impact on stolen cars, and has. Will it have an impact on the decision-making of somebody to carry a gun because they want to shoot that other guy that dissed his girlfriend on Facebook? No number of traffic stops is going to make a dent in that. And if I lock him up with a gun before he shot somebody, it's going to be a misdemeanor. So they're not really the same thing. As opposed to the protest thing, listen, everybody's got First Amendment rights, and nobody's record is better than ours protecting them. But the fact of the matter is, we negotiated with their lawyer, I can't tell you how many times, to try to not get people arrested because they refused to get the permits that everybody else got to do the same thing. And we in the police department decided we were not going to make an issue of it despite our best efforts. So a lot of the leadership of that thing knew exactly what they were doing. I think some of them were trying to precipitate an incident and get arrested. They didn't. They exercised their First Amendment rights 25 or 30 times, and we didn't arrest anybody, and we inconvenienced the rest of the city so they could. So my conscience is clear about that. I'm not categorizing them as anything except folks that refuse to get a parade permit.
Chief Flynn, you mentioned earlier about that career criminal thing that you referenced a legislator. Would you identify that legislator or at least his party affiliation, please?
The reason I'm not going to do that is the following. I was trying to work behind the scenes. Okay, the story was too good not to share.
It's true.
But the point is, yeah, fair enough. Okay, you can believe me or not believe me. All right. The bottom line is the reason I want to share it is because this was an unexpected person who evinced a willingness to try to work with me to remove some things from the law that were kind of dumb. Okay? And because this person is in the majority party, so I'll give you that much, and therefore working in a way that might cause, I don't know, excommunication, I'm not going to give up the name of that person for trying to, help us make it more rational.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Hold it down. Yeah, there you go. Just keep your finger down on it, please.
Chief, early in your comments, you mentioned something about homicides were down related to robberies.
Yeah.
As I noted that. Is it possible that the incidence of robberies has not gone down, but rather medical advances are keeping more people alive and therefore they're not resulting in homicides? Would you comment on that?
Now, what I'm about to say, all right, when homicides go down, I know that the fire department did a good job. When homicides go up, I know the fire department still did a good job. What I'm going to drive at here is that medical advances may well be keeping my homicide rate lower. My shooting rate, my non-fatal shooting rate is up about 11% compared to last year. But homicides are still up 100%. No, they're all up 84% now. What I'm noticing here, and what my colleagues are noticing, is a lot more bullets being fired and a lot more different guns being used at the same shooting. And so what I think why we're getting more deaths is less related to what is in fact very good medical coverage, okay? I mean, Frater does a fantastic job, is that I've got more guys shooting a lot more bullets. And when you fill somebody with enough holes, you're gonna kill them. And I think that's one of our variables, and a number of the chiefs in Washington shared, data and photographs and anecdotes about the high number of bullets that were being used in individual homicides.
Time for one more question. I'm going to go right, there's a gentleman there, but I'm looking at you, right next to him. Yes, please.
How do you explain the statistic of our state having the highest black male imprisonment rate in the country? And what do you think needs to do to make that change, needs to happen to make that change?
Sure. I think this is one of those things where somebody has got to get behind the gross number. Because, it doesn't really mean anything unless you get behind the number. I've advocated for a long time, has anybody thought of looking at the difference in sentencing patterns between rural and suburban counties and this city? All right? Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you're an African-American male facing a prison sentence in Milwaukee for shooting somebody, you shot somebody who looks just like you. If you're facing a robbery sentence, you're facing a robbery sentence that 2/3 of the time you rob somebody that looks just like you. If you're facing an aggravated assault prison sentence in Milwaukee County and you're an African-American male, it's 85% of your victims look just like you. So from my point of view in the city of Milwaukee, who's incarcerated is directly related to who's being victimized. Because the biggest racial disparity in the criminal justice system right now is the risk of violent death or assault. That's the disparity that in Milwaukee County they're responding to. Now, what I'd be curious to look at is, okay, let's walk away from the violent crimes. How does our sentencing compare here to the rest of the county if one of our residents gets nabbed in, name me a county far away?
Violence.
Okay, all right. What do they get here versus there? Because I think it's a working theory that the disparities you'll see are when our criminals go somewhere else and commit a crime and the house falls on them. Because it doesn't happen here. I can't have a book full of guys locked up 2 and 3 times for violent crimes walking my streets if we're over sentencing. And in this county, as I say, particularly in this city, the victims of violent crime are victimized by people who look like them. And those victims have a right to expect some level of justice. But I don't think we sentence people like the upstate counties do. One is a capacity issue, and 2 is a volume issue. So I don't know what explains it. Somebody should really get behind the numbers. They should really do. And I don't think anybody's really tried to get behind the numbers.
I'm going to have to, 1:16, I'm going to have to wrap things up there. And what I'd like to do is say a couple of things before we go. First of all, tremendous interest. We appreciate your interest, your attention today. Thank you for that. We'd also like to remind you of that there are more events coming up here at the law school or on the issue series. Will run throughout the fall. Our next event is on September 2nd. If you're interested, we'll be talking politics. We'll be talking about Governor Walker's bid for the presidency with Molly Ball, who is a political writer for The Atlantic, with Craig Gilbert, who's the Washington bureau chief for the Journal Sentinel, and with Charles Franklin, who's done a lot of polling that's asked about Governor Walker. So we invite you to join us for that, but there will be many more events, and even a few that are not on the schedule right now that will be added in the weeks to come. So thank you very much for your time, and most of all, thanks to Chief Ed Flynn for his time today. Chief, thank you.